Spider-Man has some awesome powers.
So it's no doubt that writers would try and give those to whoever they could.
But that doesn't mean that all versions of the webhead are gonna be on the straight and narrow.
Sometimes with great power comes great destruction, and that's our topic today.
Let's do it.
Coming in at number 10, we have the android clone known as Timespinner. Very early on in Spider-Man's career, just when he was first getting to know the Avengers, the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror sought to use the up-and-coming hero as a way to destroy Earth's mightiest heroes once and for all. Creating a perfect robot replica of Spider-Man known as Timespinner, this android was able to fool the Avengers into splitting up and was able to capture them one by one, seemingly capable of all the same feats as the real Spider-Man, but with a metallic body to match. Luckily for the Avengers, the real Spider-Man eventually caught wind of Kang's plan and showed up just in time to send the robot packing. But still, an android Peter Parker that can fool even the Avengers, that's some pretty messed up stuff.
In at 9, Lizard Spider-Man. The story of the Spider Lizard has its first origins going back in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 164, when Dr. Curt Connors creates an enervator device to keep Spider-Man alive after Kingpin stole the web-slinger's life force using a Vita Drain machine. Subsequently, in Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, number 32, Dr. Connors experiments further with the enervator and accidentally creates the monster known as Iguana. Connors uses the enervator on himself in order to become the Lizard and defeat Iguana, but that doesn't turn out exactly as planned, of course, because it's the friggin' Lizard, and Spider-Man has to come to the rescue. All of this comes back into relevance in Spider-Man Volume 1, number 39, where Dr. Connors persuades Spider-Man to swing by his laboratory for a checkup. It is clear that Spider-Man's mood is still being negatively affected by his earlier exposures to this machine. So in that same issue, Spider-Man faces the scourge of the Schizoid Man. The mental stresses of this battle are too much for his enervated system to handle, and a terrible transformation is triggered. So Spider-Man becomes Spider Lizard. And I think we all know why that's a scary thing.
Coming in at number 8, we have none other than the Assassin Spider-Man of Earth 8351. Over the years, Spider-Man's had many different kinds of web shooters, from homemade mechanical ones to the biological ones of the Sam Raimi films, but this is probably the only version of Spider-Man where the web shooter is literally just a gun. Yes, believe it or not, there's a Spider-Man that just shoots people instead of web slinging. Having abandoned New York in his own universe to become an international assassin alongside Wolverine following a disastrous misadventure throughout Europe, this Spider-Man has entirely given up on the great responsibility part of his mantra, only aiding the other Spider-Men against multiversal threats whenever his own reality and way of life are in danger.
And in 7, Doppelganger. Introduced in Infinity War number 1, Doppelganger was an evil, near-minded duplicate of Spider-Man that was created by Magus during the battle known as the Infinity War. The 6-armed creature was one of many doppelgangers created by Magus using Anthropomorpho's M bodies during this conflict. Although the doppelganger was killed during the Infinity War by Hobgoblin, he was mysteriously revived by the Demogoblin. When Magus was defeated by Adam Warlock at the conclusion of the Infinity War, all of the doppelgangers were destroyed except for the Spider Doppelganger, thanks to Demogoblin's magic forming a psychic link between him and Demogoblin, or I guess Demogoblin and Doppelganger. For a time, he was a pet to Demogoblin, but the two went their separate ways after a very interesting fight. Doppelganger later joined up with Carnage, Shriek, Carrion, and Demogoblin during the infamous Maximum Carnage killing spree, and in the process, she became a sort of adopted mother to Doppelganger, which made him even more dangerous. So, no thanks.
Coming in at number 6, we have The Other. Coming from a particularly weird era of Spider-Man history that seemed obsessed with turning Spider-Man's powers into having a magical and mystical origin, The Other, or Miss Arrow as her human disguise would come to be called, was a spider deity that apparently chose Peter Parker as being worthy of its powers, heavily implying itself to have controlled the radioactive spider that bit Peter in the first place. While initially bonding intertwining spiritually with Spider-Man himself and giving him a whole host of new powers, the other eventually manifested as an entirely separate being and disguised itself as a teacher at Peter Parker's school. With much of this storyline since having been wiped from canon by the events of One More Day, it's still incredibly weird to look back and go, oh yeah, Peter Parker had a teacher that was technically the manifestation of his spider powers in creepy human form. Totally normal.
Halfway through into number 5, Dark Spider-Man. When Matt Gargan was the host of the Venom symbiote, Norman Osborn gave Venom a medication that reset the symbiote to the size it was when it originally possessed Spider-Man. However, the symbiote resumed its feral traits whenever Venom was attacking an enemy. Osborn formed his version of the Avengers, providing new identities to some of his former Thunderbolts. Norman introduced this guy, Matt Gargan, as the Amazing Spider-Man in his new Avengers. During the Dark Avengers' first mission against Morgan Le Fay, Morgan's magic affected Venom, causing him to lose and gain control of himself randomly. Venom bit Ares and fought Hawkeye, which in this case was Bullseye, and after Morgan was defeated, Hawkeye promised to kill Mac one day for trying to eat him while he was under Morgan's control. And that's expected. Basically, another evil Spider-Man, but I mean it wasn't exactly Peter Parker, but still, it counts. It's still terrifying. That's the trouble with the secret identity though, okay? It's easy to be impersonated. Arrow Season 3 for example.
Coming in at number 4, we have the emo symbiote influenced Peter Parker from Sam Raimi's film Spider-Man 3. We've all seen the memes of Tobey Maguire dancing and threatening to put a little dirt in our eye, but in my opinion, this is one of the more interesting depictions of Peter Parker before he decides to get rid of his symbiote suit and accidentally causes the creation of Venom. While many interpretations of this story always show Peter becoming more violent and prone to anger as the suit begins to affect his mental state, the fact that the suit seems to only make Peter more unlikable and cool in a dickish way feels like pretty interesting commentary on what a more badass or dark Spider-Man would even look like. Even if out of context or combined with the movie's other problems, it can come across as pretty laughable. But hey, those dance moves still count as pretty scary, right?
Can 100% confirm that was definitely scary. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Imperfect Spider-Man. In 2005, a fighting game called Marvel's Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects was released, and it didn't do all that well. But it did lead to an actually decent tie-in miniseries, written by Greg Pak and drawn by Renato Arlen. In the prequel series, we saw Spider-Man, Thing, Wolverine, and Elektra be captured and injected with a illicit substance developed by an alien scientist that corrupted them into bloodthirsty killers. Well, I mean, like, Wolverine was already halfway there, but it was the biggest change for Spider-Man. The substance turned Spider-Man and the other heroes violent and brutal, eagerly fighting in an arena in gladiatorial combat. I mean, it didn't last long before Spider-Man was able to fight off this drug and escape, leading to him fighting the rest of the Imperfects, but hey, he had been affected by this substance and he became bloodthirsty, okay? A bloodthirsty Spider-Man is pretty scary, but kinda cool.
Coming in at number 2, we have Patton Parnell, with possibly the grossest use of Spider-Man's powers ever. In a twisted alternate universe where a young man named Patton Parnell is bitten by a radioactive spider, instead of becoming a superhero, Patton becomes a complete monster. Instead of being inspired by the death of his Uncle Ben, this version of Spidey captures, webs up, and eats his cruel Uncle Ted, and even implants spider eggs within the neck of the girl he supposedly loves, Sarah Jane. All in all, Patton Parnell is a tragic horror movie villain of a character, and one we definitely don't want visiting the main Marvel universe and planting eggs anytime soon.
And finally, in number 1, the Spider. Spider was a red-headed Peter Parker, a mass murderer who merged with a spider symbiote. As a sociopath who liked hurting people, Peter had a sense of humor akin to Deadpool. In the course of his criminal career, he was sentenced to 67 consecutive life sentences by a jury. So basically, he's Cletus Cassidy but Peter Parker. He was drafted by the Timebreakers into Weapon X, and he replaced Daredevil after it was presumed the Timebreakers had sent him back home. When Hyperion of Earth 4023 became a member and the de facto facto leader of Weapon X, Spider joined him in his case to conquer multiple realities. Because of course he did. Every bad version of Peter Parker wants to conquer multiple Earths. Peter was subsequently killed by Firestar with a mega blast from her powers in 2005, but he was buried in the prison cemetery of his home reality. But Peter Parker, as a Cletus Cassidy serial killer, that's absolutely terrifying.
That's all the time we have for today's list, so thank you all so much for watching. As always, I've been Josh Busker.
And I have been and shall remain Connor Monroe.
And we'll see you all next time, Nerd Squad.
And yes, I wore the suit specifically for that bit.
Mwahaha.